Good morning, everyone. My name is Charles Mbaka. I will be doing a presentation today on the topic foreign aid and foreign debts. Uh, my presentation will touch on the following areas: definition of foreign aid and foreign debt, the types of foreign aid, the advantages and disadvantages, and the burden of these debts on developing countries. So, the first part here, foreign aid refers to financial assistance, or the financial assistance can be in terms of technical support, it can be in terms of military assistance, in terms of food supplies, or humanitarian help, like during disasters. This aid is given by one country to another, or by an international monetary fund, like international financial donors, or it can be like World Bank or IMF. So the reasons for giving these aids is to support development, reduce poverty, to provide infrastructure, or in case of response to emergencies like droughts and conflicts. So there are different types of foreign aid, basically four. The first one is bilateral, which is which is like aid from which is aid with one country to another. And we also have multilateral aid, which is given by institutions to a country. For example, World Bank or IMF or NGOs given to developing countries. Another one is humanitarian aid for emergencies. Another one is military support. I will go into foreign debt, which refers to money borrowed by a government from foreign countries or banks or international financial institutions. So developing countries usually borrow money to finance their projects like hospitals, education, electricity. So these debts can come in form of loans from international institutions, or commercial loans from banks, or what we call government to government borrowing. An example is Kenya, like the recent example that I can use is the money that Kenyan government borrowed sometimes back to fund SGR. So this, as much as this foreign aids and as much as this foreign borrowing is necessary for development, it also creates a burden when there is what we call overdependence. You find that countries depend too much on this borrowing such that they cannot become self-sustainable. So I will be looking at the advantages of foreign aid. So there are several advantages that I'll tackle some. So firstly, it promotes development by financing projects such as schools, hospitals, roads, and water systems. Secondly, these aids help in reduction of poverty and improvement of living standards in these developing countries. Like many countries, they benefit from food programs, healthcare services, and educational scholarship, which improve the lives of citizens in these countries. Another advantage is that these aids, they support what we call this. They provide support during disaster and emergency seasons, like during droughts when there are wars. It also, so in these instances where we have wars or droughts, they can provide what we call maybe food, medicine, or shelter. It depends on the kind of support that is given. Another advantage is it promotes technology transfer and skill development. So when these other, like when these countries experts from these developed countries, when they come to developing countries, they can train other workers, or they can train youth to become better skilled. For example, we have agricultural aids. There's an example of agricultural aid programs in Ethiopia which have helped improve farming techniques and food production. So another advantage is increased investment and improved productivity. Another advantage is it strengthens diplomatic relations between countries. So nations receiving assistance often cooperate more closely with donor countries. Aid can also support healthcare. For example, the international support has increased. The international support has helped African countries fight contagious diseases like HIV and AIDS, Ebola, and the recent antivirus. In some countries, donor funding has improved access to clean water and sanitation. An example is Rwanda, where international support contributed to healthcare, education improvement after the 1994 genocide. So there are also, as much as these aids and these debts are good, there are also disadvantages. Despite the benefits of foreign aid, it also has its demerits. So one of the most demerits is over dependency, or what we call dependency. This dependency on these foreign aids. So some countries become too reliable and dependent on aid and fail to develop self-sustaining economies. The second disadvantage is aid may encourage corruption when funds are misused by leaders or government officials. So you find the case where like there is an aid from developed countries to developing countries. Like the recent one in Kenya was the what we call the COVID billionaires. So the money was provided for support, but the leaders didn't use it to help the citizens. So the third disadvantage is that the donor countries sometimes attach conditions to this aid. So these conditions may influence political decisions, economic policies in the recipient countries. So you find that, like for example, when these countries borrow maybe from IMF, there are certain decisions they're supposed to make. There are certain projects they're supposed to do. Like they can't make their decisions independently. The fourth disadvantage is that these aids can weaken local industries. So, for example, imported goods may reduce demand for locally produced items. Some critics even argue that long-term aid may reduce innovation and local initiative. For example, countries that rely heavily on food aid instead of investing in local agriculture. So effects of debt burden on developing countries. Another one. So I'm going straight to the effects on the burden, the burden that it gives to developing countries. So that burden refers to difficulty countries face on repaying loans and interest. So one major effect is reduced government spending on essential services. So governments may spend more money repaying debt instead of investing in healthcare, education, or infrastructure. So, like in Kenya, you find that the money that the government has borrowed over the years from China, like they are usually the budget that is given yearly, more of it is used in repaying that debt. So another effect is increased taxation and inflation. Citizens may experience higher prices and economic hardship. Debt burden can also slow economic growth because investors lose confidence in highly indebted countries. Additionally, unemployment and poverty may increase when governments cut spending. For example, some African countries spend large percentage of national revenue on debt repayment instead of development projects. Another one is it can create political instability and social unrest. So when governments fail to meet citizens' needs due to the debt burden, it may result to protest. Dissatisfaction may also increase. Countries may also lose economic independence because lenders influence national policies. Another effect is currency depreciation. So heavy foreign debt can weaken local currency and increase import costs. A recent example is Zambia, which faced serious debt challenges and defaulted on the external debt repayment in 2020. Similarly, another example from another African country is Ghana, which has recently struggled with rising debt and economic reforms linked to international lenders. This dependency may reduce economic independence because government depends on donor decisions. In some cases, projects may stop entirely when donor funding ends because local systems are not strong enough to continue supporting them. Donor dependency may reduce government accountability to the citizens because leaders focus more on satisfying donors than their citizens. Another problem is uncertainty. Donor funding may decrease global economic crisis or political disagreements. For example, some NGOs and health programs in African countries struggle when international funding is reduced. The last part here will give the examples from developing countries. In Kenya, the foreign aids have helped finance projects like railways, roads, and energy projects. However, there are concerns that as these debts rise, there may be there may be overdependence. Another example from an African country is Nigeria, which has long received foreign aid for health and humanitarian support, especially in conflict-affected regions. Another example is Uganda and Tanzania, which have benefited from donor-funded education and healthcare programs. Outside Africa, there are countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, which also depend on foreign aid and loans for development projects. This example shows that foreign aid and debt can support development, but they must be managed carefully. So in conclusion, foreign aid and foreign debt may play important roles in developing economies. Foreign aid can improve healthcare, education, infrastructure, and emergency response. However, it may also create dependency, corruption, political influence. Thank you for listening. That is my presentation.